"You're being demoted. Grace is taking over." My boss Mike's words hit me like a slap. I sat there in his cramped office, staring at the motivational posters on his wall that suddenly felt like jokes. No warning, no explanation, just betrayal served with coffee breath and a smug smile. I'd been sales manager for 8 months, top performer for over a year, built this company's reputation from nothing, and now he was handing my job to Grace, a woman who'd been here exactly 3 weeks and couldn't even work our computer system. The silence stretched between us. Mike shifted in his chair, probably expecting tears or anger. Instead, I felt this weird calm wash over me, like watching a movie where you already know the ending. "No problem," I said quietly, standing up. My voice was steady, almost cheerful. Mike looked confused. He'd probably rehearsed this conversation expecting drama. I walked to the door, then paused. "Actually, give me 5 minutes." I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed out my resignation letter. 2 sentences, professional and final. When I walked back into his office and handed him the paper, the color drained from his face. "Wait, what are you?" "Have a great day, Mike. Let me back up and tell you how this all started. 6 months earlier, I'd made what seemed like a smart career move. My old job was grinding me down, 60-hour weeks, constant travel, missing my kids' bedtime stories. When Mike offered me a position at his small tech repair company, promising better work-life balance, I jumped at it. The company was chaos when I arrived. 15 employees scattered across a tiny office space, paperwork everywhere, no real systems in place. Mike ran it like a corner store, handling everything himself and trusting no one. Customer complaints were piling up from past employees who'd apparently burned bridges left and right. But I saw potential. The local market was hungry for reliable tech support, and most competitors were either too expensive or completely unprofessional. With the right approach, we could capture serious market share. I threw myself into fixing everything. Reorganized the filing system, created customer tracking spreadsheets, developed follow-up procedures. Most importantly, I started rebuilding relationships with clients who'd been burned before. One conversation at a time, proving we'd changed. It wasn't glamorous work, but I believed in it. Mike seemed grateful for the help, always talking about growing the business and rewarding loyalty. Back then, I actually trusted him. The reputation problem was worse than I'd realized. Our company had a toxic history in the community. Previous sales staff had apparently made promises they couldn't keep, overcharged seniors, and left jobs half-finished. One elderly customer told me she'd rather fix her computer with a hammer than call us again. I spent weeks just listening to angry voicemails and reading brutal online reviews. Scammers. Thieves. Worst company ever. Each review felt like a personal attack, even though I hadn't caused any of it. But I refused to give up. I started calling every unhappy customer personally, not to sell them anything, just to apologize and ask what we could do to make things right. Most hung up immediately. Some cursed me out. A few actually listened. Mrs. Patterson was my first breakthrough. Her laptop had been repaired 3 times and each time it came back worse. I convinced her to let our best technician, Shane, take one more look. He found the previous guy had installed malware while pretending to fix viruses. Shane cleaned everything up for free. Mrs. Patterson was so shocked by the honesty that she started recommending us to her friends. Word spread slowly through the senior community that we'd changed. One satisfied customer at a time, we began erasing years of damage. After 6 months of grinding, the numbers finally started moving. My first quarter, sales tripled compared to the same period last year. Customer satisfaction scores went from 2.1 to 4.7 out of 5. We had a waiting list for service calls instead of begging for business. I'd built a simple system that worked. Morning coffee with potential clients at local cafes, afternoon follow-ups with existing customers, evening paperwork to track everything. No fancy tricks, just consistency and genuine care. Shane and I made a great team. He handled the technical side with expertise and patience, while I managed relationships and logistics. Our success rate on complex repairs hit 90%. Customers started calling us by name and bringing their friends. Mike loved the money rolling in. He bought a new truck, then a boat, then started talking about vacation homes. Every month he'd show me his bank statements like proud report cards. The company was growing faster than anyone expected, but I noticed something troubling. While he celebrated the profits, he never celebrated the people creating them. No bonuses for the team, no acknowledgement of my contributions, just endless demands for more sales while he spent the earnings on toys. Still, I was proud of what we'd built. For the first time in years, I felt truly valuable at work. Then came the promotion that changed everything. Mike called me into his office on a Friday afternoon, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Congratulations," he said, sliding a new business card across his desk. "Sales manager, 20% raise. You've earned this." I stared at the card with my name printed in bold letters. Sales manager. It felt surreal after months of proving myself. Finally, recognition for rebuilding this company's reputation from scratch. The new role came with a small team, 3 junior sales associates and 2 administrative staff. For the first time in my career, I had real authority to implement changes and train others in methods that actually worked. I spent the weekend planning training programs and thinking about growth strategies. Monday morning, I arrived early to reorganize the office space for better team collaboration. Everything felt perfect. Then Mike knocked on my door around 10 a.m. His expression had completely changed from Friday's celebration. Gone was the grin, replaced by something that looked almost apologetic. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "I'm bringing someone back to the team. Grace used to work here a few years ago, and she's got experience." My stomach dropped. Something in his tone told me this wasn't just about adding another team member. Grace walked in like she owned the place. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, confidence that filled the room before she even spoke. She had this way of looking at you like she was judging whether you deserved her attention. Mike introduced her as our returning star performer and explained she'd be helping with sales strategy. But the way he said it, the way he looked at her, made my skin crawl. I'd seen that expression before, middle-aged men thinking with something other than their brains. Grace barely acknowledged me during introductions. When I offered to show her our new systems and procedures, she laughed. "Thanks, but I'll figure things out my own way. Your methods look pretty basic." She refused training on our customer database, saying she preferred personal connections over boring spreadsheets. When I explained our follow-up procedures, she interrupted. "That's way too complicated. Customers either buy or they don't." The warning bells in my head were deafening, but I tried to stay professional. Maybe she just needed time to adjust to how much things had changed since she'd last worked here. Shane pulled me aside after Grace's first day. "Something's off about this," he whispered. "Mike's been different all week, talking about fresh energy and new perspectives. I think she's already gotten in his head." I should have listened to Shane's instincts. Instead, I decided to give Grace a chance. Grace's first client call was a disaster. Mrs. Chen needed help setting up her new tablet, a simple job that should have taken 30 minutes. I listened from across the office as Grace's voice got louder and more frustrated. "No, that's not right. You're doing it wrong. Just press the button I told you to press." There was no patience, no kindness, just irritation that the elderly woman didn't understand immediately. Then I heard the part that made my blood boil. Mrs. Chen mentioned that our technician had installed the wrong software during her last visit. Instead of apologizing and offering to fix it, Grace snapped. "Our technicians know what they're doing. Maybe you just don't know how to use technology." I could hear Mrs. Chen's voice getting shaky. This woman had trust enough to call back after previous bad experiences, and Grace was destroying that trust in real time. After the call ended, I approached Grace diplomatically. "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear. Mrs. Chen is one of our most loyal customers, and she's had some rough experiences before. Maybe you could mind your own business." Grace cut me off. "I've been doing sales longer than you've been alive." That evening, Shane told me Mrs. Chen had called him directly, crying and threatening to never use our services again. I had no choice but to write Grace up for the Mrs. Chen incident. Our company policy was clear about customer treatment, and what I'd witnessed crossed every line we'd drawn. The next morning, I presented the write-up to Mike with documentation of the call and Mrs. Chen's complaint. He read through it slowly, his face getting redder with each paragraph. "This is ridiculous," he finally said, tossing the papers back at me. "Grace is passionate about her work. Some customers are just difficult." "Mike," she made an elderly woman cry. She blamed our technician for a mistake instead of fixing it. "This isn't about being passionate." "Delete this," he interrupted, pointing at his computer screen where I'd logged the incident. "Grace is just getting back into the swing of things. She needs support, not criticism." I stared at him in disbelief. "What about Mrs. Chen? What about our customer service standards?" "She's pretty. I like her. Let it go." The words came out so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. No shame, no attempt to hide his real motivations. That's when I realized the game had completely changed. This wasn't about performance or results anymore. Grace had protection I could never compete with, and Mike had just made that crystal clear. Over the next few weeks, Grace's incompetence became impossible to ignore. Her sales numbers were terrible. Barely 20% of what I'd been producing in the same time frame. Customer complaints piled up weekly. 2 of our best technicians threatened to quit rather than clean up her mistakes. But somehow, Grace was being praised while I was being criticized. Mike started calling team meetings where he'd highlight her innovative approaches and question my old-fashioned methods. He'd ask why my team wasn't adapting to her fresh ideas. The fresh ideas included telling customers to just buy new computers instead of repairing them, promising services we didn't offer, and scheduling multiple appointments for the same time slot. When these strategies failed spectacularly, Mike blamed it on market conditions or difficult customers. Shane and I started keeping detailed records of every interaction. Customer complaints, missed appointments, revenue losses. We documented everything. The numbers didn't lie. Grace was costing us money and reputation every single day. But numbers didn't matter anymore. During one particularly frustrating meeting, I presented data showing our customer satisfaction had dropped 40% since Grace's return. Mike barely glanced at the charts. "Statistics can be manipulated," he said dismissively. "What matters is having the right people in the right positions." The message was clear. I was no longer the right person. Things got worse when Mike started calling me lazy and sloppy. According to him, the team wasn't meeting goals anymore. Sales were down. Customer service was suffering. Everything was falling apart, and somehow it was all my fault. I spent hours double-checking our numbers, convinced I'd missed something crucial. But the data told a different story. We were actually performing 5 times above the targets we'd set at the beginning of the year. Revenue was up 60% from the previous quarter. Customer retention had improved dramatically. So why was Mike claiming we were failing? I couldn't understand the disconnect between reality and his accusations. Shane helped me piece together what was happening. Mike had started including Grace's poor performance in team averages, which dragged down our overall numbers. Then he'd compare these artificially low averages to impossible new targets he'd created without telling anyone. "He's moving the goalposts," Shane explained during one of our private conversations, "making you look bad so he can justify whatever he's planning next." The gaslighting was exhausting. Every day brought new criticism about performance that was actually excellent. I started doubting my own abilities, wondering if I'd somehow lost my touch. But the customers told a different story. They kept calling specifically to work with me, praising our service, and recommending us to friends. The mystery solved itself when I accidentally saw Mike's personal bank statements on his desk. He'd left them open while rushing to a meeting, and the numbers made me sick. Boat payments, $3,000 monthly. Luxury car lease, $1,200. Home renovation, $15,000. Vacation expenses, $8,000 just last month. He was spending money faster than we could earn it, despite our strong sales performance. That explained his constant pressure for more sales and his angry reactions to any expenses. The company was profitable, but Mike was bleeding it dry with personal purchases. He was living like a millionaire on a small business income. The next day, he pulled me aside with another impossible demand. "We need to increase sales by 50% this quarter. I've got expenses to cover." "Mike, that's not realistic. We're already performing above." "I don't care about your excuses. I need to live. You figure out how to sell more." The entitlement was staggering. He'd built nothing, contributed nothing to our recent success, but felt entitled to drain the company for his lifestyle. Meanwhile, the employees doing actual work hadn't seen raises or bonuses in years. I realized Mike wasn't just a bad boss, he was fundamentally selfish. The company existed to fund his toys, not to provide stable employment or quality service. The breaking point came when Mike tried to force me to cancel my wedding and honeymoon. I'd requested the time off 6 months in advance, back when he was praising my performance and promising better work-life balance. "You can't take 2 weeks off right now," he announced during a staff meeting, making sure everyone heard. "We're too busy, and you're not pulling your weight anyway." The public humiliation stung, but the timing made it worse. My fiancé and I had already paid for everything: venue deposits, flights, hotel reservations. Our families had planned around these dates for months. "Mike, we discussed this half a year ago. You approved the time off in writing." Things change. If you can't prioritize the company over personal plans, maybe you're not management material. I didn't fight back. Something inside me just broke, like a rubber band stretched too far. I sat quietly through the rest of the meeting, nodding when appropriate, but mentally I was already gone. That evening, I started updating my resume and reaching out to former contacts. If Mike wanted to play games with my personal life, he could play them without me. The wedding was in 3 months. I'd give him exactly that long to figure out how much he really needed me. While I was planning my exit strategy, Grace and Mike landed what they called a huge contract with a local business complex. They'd negotiated it without involving me or Shane, despite both of us having experience with commercial accounts. When they proudly showed me the paperwork, my heart sank. They'd underbid the project by at least 50%. The contract promised services we couldn't deliver at prices that wouldn't cover our costs. "This is going to bankrupt us," I told Mike privately. "We'll lose money on every hour we work. The timeline is impossible, and the scope keeps expanding with no additional fees." He waved away my concerns. "You always find problems instead of solutions. Grace landed this deal through her connections. We'll make it work." "How? The numbers don't add up. We'd need to work for free to meet these commitments." "Figure it out. I just bought a boat, and I need this income to cover the payments." There it was again, his personal expenses driving business decisions. He'd rather destroy the company than admit he'd made a mistake or give up his toys. I begged him to renegotiate or cancel the contract. The client was reasonable and would understand if we explained the pricing error. But Mike refused to admit any weakness in front of Grace. We were committed to financial suicide, and he was too proud to save us. The public dressing down happened on a Tuesday morning in front of the entire staff. Mike called an emergency meeting and spent 20 minutes listing my supposed failures: lazy, disloyal, negative attitude, unable to meet targets. None of it was true, but I sat there and took it. The alternative was fighting back and making everything worse for the team members who'd have to deal with the aftermath. "Maybe if you spent less time complaining and more time working, we'd see better results," Mike concluded, his voice echoing off the office walls. I could see my coworkers looking at me with pity and confusion. They knew the real numbers. They'd watched me build most of our client relationships from scratch. This performance was for Grace's benefit, not based on any reality. When the meeting ended, Shane approached me quietly. "Everyone knows that was garbage," he whispered. "We all see what's really happening here." But knowing didn't help. The damage was done. Mike had publicly branded me as the problem, setting up the narrative for whatever came next. That night, I barely slept. Every criticism echoed in my head, even though I knew it was false. Gaslighting works by making you question your own perception of reality. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't quitting yet, but I was done caring about Mike's opinion. Instead of quitting, I decided to prove my worth one last time. If Mike wanted results, I'd give him results that couldn't be denied or twisted. I threw everything I had at saving that disastrous contract Grace had negotiated. 12-hour days became normal. I restructured the project timeline, found cost-cutting measures, and personally managed every detail to prevent overruns. My family barely saw me. I missed dinner with my kids most nights, working until they were asleep and leaving before they woke up. My body started breaking down from stress and exhaustion, but I pushed through anyway. Somehow, impossibly, I made the project profitable. By cutting corners elsewhere and working unpaid overtime, we delivered on Grace's promises without losing money. The client was thrilled with our service and started recommending us to other businesses. But Grace got all the credit. Mike praised her relationship-building skills and held her up as an example of how sales should be done. According to the company newsletter, she'd single-handedly saved our biggest contract through innovative thinking and customer focus. The lie was so blatant that even Grace looked embarrassed when Mike announced it. She knew she'd nearly destroyed the account, but she wasn't going to correct the record. I realized then that no amount of work would ever be enough. Mike had chosen his favorite, and reality didn't matter anymore. Shane quietly showed me something that made my blood boil. Grace had been manipulating the sales reports, inflating her numbers and downplaying mine. According to her falsified data, she was responsible for 80% of our recent revenue growth. The real numbers told a completely different story. Grace had closed exactly 3 small deals in 2 months, totaling less than $5,000 in revenue. I'd brought in over $40,000 in the same period, plus saved the major contract she'd nearly ruined. But Mike believed Grace's version. He'd stopped checking source documents or customer records, just accepting whatever numbers she provided. Her reports painted her as a superstar, and me as deadweight. "She's gunning for your job," Shane warned me, "and she's winning." I stared at the falsified reports, feeling a mixture of rage and amazement. Grace wasn't just incompetent, she was actively dishonest. Yet she was being rewarded while I was being pushed out. That evening, I made copies of everything. The real sales figures, customer communications, project records. If this situation ever ended up in court or unemployment hearings, I wanted documentation of the truth. But documentation wouldn't save my job. Mike had already made his choice, and facts weren't going to change his mind. Job offers started coming in from competitors who'd noticed our success and wanted to poach talent. 3 different companies reached out within 2 weeks, offering better pay and working conditions. The timing was perfect. My wedding was still 2 months away, and I needed to make a decision about my future. Stay and fight a battle I couldn't win, or cut my losses and start fresh somewhere better. The morning I accepted the best offer, Mike called me into his office for what I thought would be another lecture. Instead, he had Grace sitting beside him, smiling like she'd already won a prize. "We're restructuring again," Mike announced. "Grace is taking over as sales manager. You'll be demoted back to junior sales associate. Be grateful you're not being fired." I looked at both of them sitting there, so confident in their power play. Mike expected tears or arguments. Grace expected me to beg for mercy. Instead, I smiled. "No problem," I said calmly, standing up from my chair. The confusion on their faces was priceless. They'd planned this dramatic scene, but I wasn't following their script. "Actually, give me 5 minutes," I added, walking toward the door. When I came back with my resignation letter, Mike's face went white. "Wait, what are you doing?" "Having a great day, Mike." The moment I walked out, everything started falling apart. Grace and Mike couldn't operate the customer database system I'd built. They didn't know how to process invoices or track job progress. Basic daily operations became impossible without the procedures I'd developed. Within hours, clients were calling with questions that nobody could answer. Service appointments were missed because no one knew how to check the schedule. Billing got so confused that customers received invoices for jobs they'd never requested. Grace tried to wing it, but her lack of training became obvious immediately. She couldn't find customer records, didn't understand our pricing structure, and had no idea how to coordinate with the technical team. Mike panicked and called me 3 times that first day. I let every call go to voicemail. Then he sent increasingly desperate text messages begging me to help during the transition. Each message offered more money and better terms. But I was done. I'd given him months to value my contributions, and he'd chosen Grace instead. Now he could live with that choice. Shane texted me that evening. "It's chaos here. Nobody knows how anything works. Grace is crying in the bathroom and Mike is yelling at everyone." The schadenfreude felt amazing. But I also felt sorry for my former teammates who were caught in the mess. Within 2 weeks, 13 of the 15 people on my team had resigned. Word spread quickly that I'd been pushed out despite building the company's success, and people started jumping ship. The technicians refused to work with Grace after she blamed them for her mistakes one too many times. The administrative staff got tired of being yelled at for problems they hadn't created. Even the custodial worker quit, saying the office had become too toxic. Shane was among the first to leave, taking a position at my new company. "I'm not staying to watch this train wreck," he told Mike. "You had the best team in the industry, and you destroyed it for personal reasons." Most of my former teammates followed me to the new job, where they were welcomed with competitive salaries and actual respect. My new boss understood that good employees were assets to be valued, not obstacles to be eliminated. Mike tried everything to stop the exodus. He offered raises he couldn't afford, promised changes he wouldn't implement, and even tried bribing people to stay. But trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with money. Grace was left managing operations she didn't understand with a skeleton crew of inexperienced replacements. The company that had been thriving just weeks earlier was now barely functional. The customer exodus began almost immediately. Over 300 accounts called to cancel their service agreements and asked specifically to work with me at my new company. Mrs. Patterson, my first breakthrough customer, explained it perfectly. "I never trusted your old boss. I only stayed because of you. If you're somewhere else, that's where I want to be." Word of mouth travels fast in small communities, especially when people feel betrayed. Customers who'd finally learned to trust our company after years of bad experiences felt abandoned when I left. They assumed the old problems would return without me there to maintain standards. And they were right. Grace's customer service skills made the previous staff look professional by comparison. Complaints flooded in about rude treatment, missed appointments, and overcharging. All the reputation repair I'd done over months was undone in weeks. My new company's phone rang constantly with former clients wanting to switch. We had to hire additional staff just to handle the influx of business. What had taken me a year to build at Mike's company, I rebuilt at the new place in a month. The irony was beautiful. Mike had fired me to make room for Grace, but he'd actually fired his entire customer base along with me. Grace's complete collapse was painful to watch, even from a distance. She was now responsible for managing 10 different aspects of the business that she'd never bothered to learn. The technicians who remained openly boycotted her directives. They'd show up to jobs she'd scheduled, find out she'd promised impossible services, and have to explain to angry customers why their expectations couldn't be met. Sales were in free fall. Grace couldn't close deals because she didn't understand the technical side well enough to answer basic questions. When she tried to fake knowledge, experienced customers saw through it immediately. The breaking point came when Shane's replacement recorded Grace screaming at a client over the phone. She was demanding payment for services that hadn't been completed, using language that would make a sailor blush. Someone posted the audio online, and it went viral in our local business community. That recording destroyed whatever credibility the company had left. Grace became a laughingstock, and Mike's business became synonymous with unprofessional behavior. Within days of the recording's release, the last major clients canceled their contracts. Grace had managed to destroy in months what it had taken years to build. 6 months after I left, Mike's company was finished. He tried desperately to sell it, but there was nothing left to buy. No customers, no reputation, no systems, no staff. Just debts and a lease on empty office space. The business closure made local news, mainly because of how quickly it had collapsed. Reporters called it a cautionary tale about leadership failure and interviewed former employees about the toxic culture that led to the downfall. Grace applied for a job at my new company during this period. Her resume crossed my desk as part of the hiring process, and I had to laugh at the audacity. She'd inflated her accomplishments at Mike's company, claiming credit for successes I'd achieved. I clicked "Do not hire" without a second thought. She'd burned her bridges with me, and I wasn't about to give her a chance to damage my new workplace. Mike tried reaching out several times, apparently hoping I'd feel sorry for him and offer some kind of help. Each message was more pathetic than the last, alternating between apologies and attempts to blame everyone else for his failures. But I was done with both of them. They'd made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. I had my own success to focus on. Months later, a friend called with news that explained everything about Grace's behavior. "You'll never believe this," she said, barely containing her excitement. "Grace was cheating on her husband the whole time. And you'll never guess who with." The truth was somehow worse than I'd imagined. Grace hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been cheating with someone else entirely, not Mike. But Mike was the real father of her child, a secret that had just exploded when paternity tests were required for the divorce. The timeline was disgusting. Grace had been married, pregnant, and sleeping with multiple men while destroying my career. Mike had been paying for her lifestyle and protecting her job because he thought he was the father, but he'd been played as badly as everyone else. Her husband filed for divorce immediately, taking their other children and demanding full custody. The scandal rocked their small social circle, with details spilling out in court documents that became public record. Mike had been so blinded by attraction that he'd ruined his business for a woman who was using him. Grace had been manipulating everyone around her for personal gain, with no loyalty to anyone. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe. The aftermath was swift and brutal for both of them. Grace's husband took everything in the divorce: house, cars, savings accounts. She was left with nothing but debt and a reputation that made her unemployable in our community. Mike lost his business, his boat, his fancy car, and his dream house. Everything he'd bought with company money was repossessed when the business failed. The man who'd once bragged about his lifestyle was now living in a one-bedroom apartment and working a regular 9-to-5 job. His new position was at a competitor's company, doing basic administrative work for a fraction of what he'd been making as a business owner. Former colleagues who'd once envied his success now pitied his fall from grace. The boat he'd bought instead of giving his employees raises was sold at auction for half what he'd paid. The renovation he'd prioritized over company equipment was never finished. All the symbols of success he'd flaunted were gone. Grace moved back in with her parents, a 35-year-old single mother starting over from zero. Her professional reputation was so damaged that she had to look for work in completely different industries. Meanwhile, I was thriving in my new position, surrounded by colleagues who valued competence over politics. Looking back on this wild journey, I can honestly say I'm happier than I've ever been. My new job provides the work-life balance I'd originally sought when joining Mike's company. I see my kids every evening, take real vacations, and work with people who treat each other with respect. My former team members are thriving too. Shane got promoted to department head within 6 months. The technicians are earning better wages and building their careers without toxic management. We created something special at the new company, built on the foundation of trust and mutual support. Grace and Mike tried to destroy me because they thought I was replaceable. They assumed my success was just luck or circumstance, not the result of years of relationship building and genuine care for customers. But they forgot one crucial thing. I hadn't just worked for that company. I had built everything that made it valuable. The customer relationships, the systems, the reputation, all of it was connected to me personally, not to the business name on the door. When they forced me out, they didn't just lose an employee. They lost the entire foundation their success was built on. And I took it all with me to somewhere it would be appreciated. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being successful while your enemies destroy themselves.